The rain hammered against the windshield as Captain Nora Khalid pulled her civilian Honda into the North Island Naval Air Station gate at 5:47 hours. She'd driven through the night from San Diego, still wearing the jeans and leather jacket from her sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, her dress blues folded carefully in the back seat. The young Marine corporal at the checkpoint barely glanced at her ID before waving her through with the bored efficiency of someone who'd processed 1,000 credentials that week. What he didn't notice was the small gold trident pin on her jacket collar, dulled by years of wear, or the calluses on her hands that came from a decade of gripping control sticks in combat zones most people only saw on classified briefings. She was halfway to the operations building when the siren started, not the routine test pattern everyone ignored, but the urgent, staccato wail that meant something had gone catastrophically wrong. Her phone erupted with encrypted messages before she could even park. The operations officer's voice came through clipped and tense. Viper 1, we have a situation. SEAL Team Extraction went sideways in the strait. They're trapped on a fishing vessel, taking fire from 3 directions, and the helo took an RPG. There in the water. Nora was already running toward the hangar, her civilian shoes slapping against wet concrete. She'd been in this situation before, in places with names she couldn't mention to anyone outside her clearance level. The muscle memory kicked in before conscious thought, her mind already calculating fuel loads, weapons configurations, and the brutal mathematics of how long men could survive in cold water under enemy fire. The same Marine corporal from the gate was suddenly in front of her, hand up, professional but firm. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your vehicle. This is a restricted area during active operations." She reached for her credentials, but he was already shaking his head. "Ma'am, I understand you have base access, but during emergency protocols, only essential personnel." "Corporal, I need to get to that hangar right now." "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm going to have to ask you to. Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the humid morning air between them. Behind her, she could hear the whine of turbines spooling up, the organized chaos of a combat sortie being assembled in minutes instead of hours. Somewhere in the Strait of Hormuz, men she'd trained with were counting seconds, watching the sky, wondering if help would arrive before the bullets or the water claimed them. The corporal looked at her civilian clothes, her Honda with the fatting bumper stickers, her lack of visible rank or unit insignia. He saw what everyone saw first, a woman in her mid-30s who looked like she'd taken a wrong turn on her way to the base exchange. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back to your vehicle." Nora felt the familiar weight of underestimation settle on her shoulders, the same weight she'd carried since her first day at flight school 12 years ago. The hangar was 200 yards away. SEAL Team 7 was 3,000 miles away, fighting for their lives in water that would kill them from hypothermia before the enemy could. And standing between her and the FA-18F Super Hornet that bore her actual call sign was a Marine corporal doing exactly what he'd been trained to do. Follow protocol, trust the visible markers of authority, assume that real operators looked like the ones in the recruitment posters. Nora took a slow breath, the kind that came before every combat launch, the kind that separated panic from precision. She'd been here before in different forms. The young Air Force instructor who'd suggested she might be happier in transport. The Navy commander who'd questioned whether women had the upper body strength for carrier landings. The senator's aide who'd called her testimony about combat effectiveness emotional rather than experiential. She pulled out her phone, thumbed to a contact simply listed as WARCOM, and pressed call. The corporal's radio crackled before the second ring. The voice that came through wasn't polite or patient. It was the voice of a man whose teammates were dying. "Who the hell is stopping my pilot?" The corporal's face changed, confusion giving way to realization, then something close to horror. "Sir, I didn't." "Get her to the flight line, now." Nora was already moving, breaking into a run that sent her jacket flapping behind her. The corporal followed, stammering apologies she didn't have time to acknowledge. The hangar doors were open, revealing the sleek, predatory shape of her Super Hornet, already armed and fueled, her crew chief Ramirez directing ordnance techs with the controlled urgency of someone who'd been through this drill in real life, not just training. He saw her coming and pointed to the ready room without breaking stride. "Flight suits waiting, Captain. Pre-flight's complete. We loaded the full loadout you specified last week." She stripped out of her civilian clothes in 40 seconds, pulling on the Nomex flight suit that still smelled faintly of jet fuel and sweat from her last training sortie. Her call sign was stenciled above the left breast pocket in faded letters. Viper One. Not some cute nickname from flight school, not some reference to her appearance or personality. It had been earned in the skis over Kandahar when she'd been the only strike fighter within range of a platoon about to be overrun, when she'd made 3 gun runs at altitudes that violated every safety protocol because precision mattered more than survival when Marines were counting on you. The briefing took 90 seconds. Lieutenant Commander Hayes had the tactical display up, showing the last known position of the SEAL team, the Iranian fast boats converging on their position, and the expanding search radius where their downed helicopter had gone into the water. The Hello crews accounted for, picked up by friendly forces, but Team 7 is on a commandeered fishing vessel taking heavy fire. They've got wounded. We've got maybe 20 minutes before Iranian naval forces arrive in strength, and then this becomes an international incident instead of a rescue. "Rules of engagement?" Nora asked, already knowing the answer but needing to hear it officially. "Defend American forces. Weapons free on hostile boats firing on our people. But Viper One, we need precision here. The fishing vessel is wooden, our people are exposed, and there are civilian boats in the area." She nodded, feeling the familiar weight of impossible expectations settling across her shoulders. Save the team. Don't start a war. Don't miss. Don't hit friendlies. Execute perfectly under conditions that would challenge pilots with twice her flight hours. She pulled on her helmet, the weight familiar and grounding, and headed for the flight line. The Super Hornet waited like a coiled predator, 44,000 pounds of thrust and precision munitions. Ramirez helped her through the pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, their communication reduced to hand signals and single words after 3 years of flying together. He knew her tolerances, knew she'd accept a marginal bird if the mission required it but wouldn't tolerate sloppiness in maintenance. "She's perfect, Captain," he said, patting the fuselage. "Bring 'em home." The launch was smooth, catapult acceleration pressing her back into the seat, with familiar force before the Super Hornet clawed skyward into the pre-dawn darkness. The tactical frequency crackled to life as she cleared the coast, multiple voices overlapping in the controlled chaos of a rescue operation spinning up across 3 time zones. AWACS controllers tracking surface contacts, fighter cover coordinating positions, and underneath it all, almost lost in the radio chatter, a voice she recognized immediately despite the strain. Lieutenant James Garrett, SEAL Team 7's officer in charge, calling for help with the measured calm of someone who'd been in bad situations before but knew this one was threading toward catastrophic. Any station, this is Trident 7. We are taking effective fire from multiple surface contacts, have 2 urgent surgical and need immediate air support. Our position is a burst of static, then, taking water. I say again, we are taking water. Nora checked her navigation. 18 minutes to target area. She pushed the throttles forward, watching the airspeed indicator climb as the Super Hornet accelerated to just below supersonic. The ocean below was still dark, stars fatting as dawn approached from the east. In that liminal space between night and day, somewhere ahead, men were making the calculations that came when ammunition ran low and hope ran lower. Trident 7, Viper 1, I'm inbound your position, 18 minutes out. Need you to mark your location and give me a picture of hostile positions. There was a pause long enough that she wondered if they'd lost communications. Then Garrett's voice came back, surprised and uncertain. Viper 1, say again your aircraft type. Super Hornet full loadout, I'm your close air support. Another pause, and this time she could hear the unspoken question in the silence. They'd been expecting an AC-130 gunship, maybe an Apache team, something designed for this kind of surgical, danger-close work. The Super Hornet was a fleet defense fighter, designed for air-to-air combat and standoff strikes, not the knife-fighting ranges where friendly and enemy positions measured in meters instead of kilometers. She could hear the doubt in his hesitation, the mental calculation of whether one fighter pilot could make the difference against multiple fast boats in confused waters, while friendly forces were exposed and vulnerable. Copy that, Viper 1. We're the fishing vessel, approximately 80 feet, wooden hull, flying an American flag off the stern. 3 hostile boats, looks like Revolutionary Guard fast attack craft, circling and engaging with heavy machine guns. They're trying to close and board. We've been keeping them off with small arms, but we're running low on ammunition and the boat's taking on water. We've got 2 wounded who need immediate casevac. Nora was already pulling up her targeting pod feed, the world below appearing in shades of green and gray as the infrared sensors painted the tactical picture. She could see the heat signatures of the boats, the muzzle flashes as they exchanged fire, the larger signature of what had to be the fishing vessel trailing a thin line of smoke. Trident 7, I need exact positions of all friendlies. I'm going to be making gun runs at low altitude. I cannot repeat, cannot afford any confusion about where you are. Roger that, Viper 1. We're all on the fishing vessel, north side behind the cabin structure. Hostiles are circling at approximately 100 to 200 meters, coming in from east, south, and west vectors. The Super Hornet dropped through 10,000 feet, and Nora armed the M61 Vulcan cannon, 20mm rounds that could shred a fast boat or punch through a wooden fishing vessel with equal efficiency. This was the nightmare scenario every fighter pilot trained for but hoped never to face. Danger-close gun runs where the margin between saving lives and taking them measured in fractions of a second and feet of separation. The dawn was breaking now, painting the strait in shades of amber and rose that would have been beautiful in any other context. She could see them now visually, not just on sensors, the fishing vessel listing noticeably to port, the smaller fast boats darting in like sharks. She rolled inverted and pulled, the Super Hornet arcing down toward the surface in a maneuver that would have earned a failing grade in any training scenario, bringing her nose in line with the eastern fast boat. The targeting reticle danced across the boat, and she waited for the moment when geometry and physics aligned, when she could be certain the rounds would go where she intended and nowhere else. The fast boat's machine gun flashed, bullets stitching toward the fishing vessel. She squeezed the trigger. The Vulcan cannon roared, and the Super Hornet shuddered as it spat rounds at 4,000 per minute. The fast boat disappeared in a geyser of water and debris. Splash 1, Garrett's voice carried the first hint of hope she'd heard. Good effect on target, Viper 1. 2 remaining hostiles are breaking off, heading south. She pulled up hard, the G-forces pressing her down into the seat as the Super Hornet clawed back to altitude. Her vision narrowed, gray creeping in at the edges, but she'd learned years ago how to strain against the pressure, how to keep blood flowing to her brain through sheer muscular effort and controlled breathing. Negative, Trident 7, they're repositioning for another run, stay down. She came around for the second pass, and this time both remaining boats opened fire on her. She could see the tracer rounds arcing up, surprisingly slow-looking despite their actual velocity, and made the split-second calculation that had kept her alive through 5 combat deployments. Trust the geometry, trust the aircraft, trust the training. The southern boat had positioned itself poorly, silhouetted against the lighter water. She walked the cannon fire across its length, and it erupted in flames. The third boat commander had learned from watching his companions die. He cut speed suddenly, letting the Super Hornet overshoot, and positioned his boat so close to the fishing vessel that any gun run risked hitting friendly forces. Nora pulled back to altitude, circling, running calculations in her head. She was low on cannon ammunition after 2 strafing runs. The boat commander knew it too, or at least suspected, and he was pressing his advantage, closing the distance. Viper 1 hostile boat is closing to boarding range. We're trying to suppress with small arms, but the transmission cut off with a burst of heavy fire. Then Garrett was back, voice tight. We're about to be boarded. Nora made a decision that would either be studied at Miramar as brilliant improvisation or investigated as reckless endangerment. She dropped to wave-top height, pushing the Super Hornet down until she could see individual waves, until the water seemed close enough to touch. The turbine wash created walls of spray on either side, and she aimed the aircraft directly at the gap between the fishing vessel and the fast boat, threading a needle at 300 knots with 2 feet of clearance. The boat commander saw the Super Hornet coming and made the fatal mistake of trying to evade, turning his boat directly into the aircraft's jet wash. The thrust from 2 F-414 turbines, producing 35,000 pounds of force, hit the boat like a physical wall. It flipped, stern over bow, spilling men into the water before capsizing completely. Nora pulled up, her heart hammering, knowing how close she'd come to miscalculating, to turning a rescue into a tragedy. But the fishing vessel was intact, and Trident 7 was transmitting again. Viper 1, all hostile vessels neutralized. You just saved our asses with a jet wash. That was the craziest. That was incredible flying. She circled overhead while the rescue helicopter came in, watching as the SEAL team transferred wounded onto stretchers, as the fishing vessel finally surrendered to the water and began its slow sink to the bottom. By the time she landed back at North Island, the sun was fully up, painting the base in the harsh light of morning. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and muscle memory, her flight suit soaked with sweat despite the cockpit cooling. Ramirez was waiting with water and a grin. Word is you did some cowboy shit out there, Captain. Word travels fast. Word is you flew low enough to wash a boat over. Word is SEAL Team 7 is calling you a guardian angel. She smiled despite her exhaustion. They'd call anyone who pulled their asses out of the fire a guardian angel. Yeah, but they're usually not asking specifically when that's someone's next on the duty roster. Lieutenant Garrett wants to buy you a drink. His co wants to thank you personally. And WARCOM wants a full debrief in 2 hours. Nora nodded, already thinking about the paperwork, the after-action reports, the scrutiny that came with any mission that involved weapons release in contested waters. But for now, in this moment, she let herself feel the satisfaction of having done the job she'd trained for, the job she was good at, regardless of what anyone assumed when they first saw her. The same Marine corporal from that morning approached cautiously, carrying her jacket and civilian clothes that someone had retrieved from the ready room. He looked young suddenly, aware that he'd made a mistake but not quite understanding the magnitude. Captain Khalid, I wanted to apologize for this morning. I didn't realize. You were doing your job, Corporal, she interrupted, not unkindly. Protocol matters. But maybe next time, when someone says they need to get to a hangar during an emergency, ask a few more questions before assuming they're lost. He nodded, looking relieved at not being dressed down. Yes, ma'am, and ma'am, what you did out there taking down those boats, saving the SEAL team, that's going to be talked about for a long time. She took her jacket from him, feeling the weight of the gold Trident pin, earned not through assumption or appearance but through the 1,000 small decisions that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. It's just the job, Corporal, same as yours. We all do our part. But as she walked toward the operations building for her debrief, she knew it was more than that. It always had been. Every flight was a referendum, every mission a chance to prove or disprove the assumptions people made. The young instructor who doubted her had been wrong. The commander who'd questioned her strength had been wrong. And the Marine corporal who'd seen her civilian clothes and assumed she didn't belong had been wrong. But being right, being excellent, being the pilot that SEAL teams specifically requested, That required proving it again and again, in skis over hostile waters, in situations where perfection was the baseline expectation, and anything less meant people died. The debrief lasted 3 hours. Nora walked them through every decision, every maneuver, defending her choice to use jet wash as a weapon with technical precision and tactical reasoning. The senior officers listened, asked pointed questions, and eventually nodded their approval. The mission had been successful. The SEAL team was safe. The incident hadn't escalated into an international confrontation. She'd done everything right against odds that would have challenged pilots with twice her experience. Afterward, Lieutenant Commander Hayes caught her in the hallway. "That was some flying, Nora. I've been doing this 20 years, and I've never seen anyone thread a needle like that at wave-top height. You've got titanium nerves." "Just math, sir. Geometry, physics, and confidence in the aircraft." He smiled knowingly. "It's never just math. You know that. There's a reason WARCOM is talking about you for the Advanced Tactics Instructor Program. There's a reason younger pilots ask to fly your wing. You've got something that can't be taught from a manual." Nora felt uncomfortable with the praise, the way she always did. Compliments felt like traps sometimes, like expectations being set that would become ammunition when she eventually fell short. "I just do the job, sir." "No," Hayes said seriously. "You do it better than most, and in case no one's told you lately, that matters. What you did this morning saved 12 lives. 12 men who get to go home to their families because you were excellent when it counted. That's not just doing a job, that's being exactly who you trained to become." She drove home that evening still in her flight suit, too tired to change. The wedding rehearsal dinner felt like a week ago instead of last night. Her phone buzzed with messages from her sister, worried because Nora had disappeared without explanation, annoyed because she'd missed the rehearsal this morning. She'd respond later after sleep, after the adrenaline finally finished metabolizing. There was no way to explain to civilians what the morning had been like. The weight of knowing that men's lives depended on her precision. The physics of flying a 40,000-pound aircraft within feet of friendly forces. She thought about the Marine corporal, about the moment when he'd looked at her and seen nothing that suggested capability or authority. She'd been angry at first, defensive, ready to pull rank and force recognition. But as the hours passed and the mission became a success story rather than a tragedy, she found herself thinking about visibility in different terms. The corporal hadn't been malicious. He'd simply relied on the patterns he'd been taught to recognize, the visual markers that signaled operator in his experience. She didn't fit those patterns. She never had. And maybe, she thought as she finally pulled into her apartment complex, that was its own kind of advantage. People who underestimated her tended to get out of her way once they realized their mistake. People who saw her as an exception, an outlier, an improbable success story, often became the loudest advocates. The SEAL team didn't care that she was 5'6" and had worn a bridesmaid dress last night. They cared that she'd put rounds precisely on target in conditions that demanded perfection. That mattered more than fitting someone's preconception of what a combat pilot should look like. Her phone rang just as she was unlocking her door. Unknown number, but the area code was San Diego. She answered, expecting another debrief request. Instead, a voice she didn't recognize. "Captain Khalid, this is Lieutenant Garrett, SEAL Team 7. I wanted to thank you personally for what you did this morning. I've been in some tight spots, but that was as close as I've come to not making it home. I'm glad I was in position to help, Lieutenant." "It was more than help, ma'am. It was the finest display of combat aviation I've ever witnessed. The way you put those gun runs exactly where they needed to be. The way you used your jet wash to disable that last boat. I've worked with a lot of pilots over the years, and I've never seen anyone fly with that level of precision under those conditions. You saved 12 lives today. I wanted to make sure you knew that we know what it costs to be that good." Nora felt unexpected emotion tightening her throat. "Thank you, Lieutenant. That means a lot." There's something else, Garrett continued. I pulled your file. I read about Kandahar, about the platoon you covered during Operation Spearhead. I read the citation for your Distinguished Flying Cross. You've been doing this kind of work for a long time, being excellent when it matters most. I just wanted you to know that we see it. The team sees it. And if you ever need anything, anything at all, SEAL Team 7 owes you. That's not rhetoric. That's a debt. After he hung up, Nora sat in her car for a long moment, staring at nothing. The exhaustion was catching up to her, the adrenaline crash making her limbs heavy. But underneath the fatigue was something else, something harder to name. Validation, maybe. Recognition. The knowledge that the gap between perception and reality, between what people assumed she was and what she'd proven herself to be, was closing. Not everywhere, not all at once, but in the places that mattered, among the people who counted on her to be perfect when their lives were on the line. The next morning, she wore her dress blues to her sister's wedding, the uniform crisp and pressed, ribbons aligned with regulation precision. The Distinguished Flying Cross stood out among the other decorations, a small piece of bronze that represented a day in Afghanistan, when she'd expended every round she carried keeping Taliban fighters off a surrounded platoon. Her sister beamed when she saw her, forgiving the missed rehearsal, proud in the uncomplicated way that came from never having to prove yourself in combat. During the reception, a retired Navy captain approached, someone's uncle with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "Those are quite the ribbons, Captain. What do you fly?" "FA-18 Super Hornet, sir." His eyebrows rose appreciatively. "Fighter pilot, that's impressive. What squadron?" She told him and watched his expression shift as he placed the unit, realized what operations she would have been part of. "You were part of the rescue operation yesterday, weren't you? The SEAL extraction in the Strait." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, and she could see the recalibration happening, the adjustment of expectations against evidence. "I read the preliminary report this morning. That was exceptional work. The kind of flying that reminds old men like me why we served. You should be proud." "Thank you, sir. I'm just glad everyone made it home." "Humility doesn't make you less capable," he said gently. "Don't mistake confidence for arrogance. You earn the right to own what you've accomplished." The conversation stayed with her through the evening, through the toasts and dancing and the comfortable chaos of a family celebration. She thought about the Marine corporal, about Lieutenant Garrett's phone call, about the captain's advice. She'd spent so long proving herself that she'd forgotten to simply accept that she'd done so. The evidence was overwhelming at this point. The combat deployments, the decorations, the specific requests from special operations units. She was good at what she did, not for a woman. Not despite expectations, just good, full stop. The following week brought a new assignment notification. She'd been selected as a primary instructor for the Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center's Advanced Tactics course. The email from the selection board was professionally neutral, but buried in the third paragraph was a line that made her pause. "Your demonstrated expertise in complex combat scenarios and precision weapons employment makes you ideally suited to shape the next generation of strike fighter pilots." Ramirez congratulated her with his typical irreverence. "Now you get to torture cocky lieutenants the way you were tortured. Circle of life, Captain." "I wasn't tortured in flight school." He gave her a look that said he knew she was lying, that everyone knew the stories about female pilots facing extra scrutiny, additional check rides, the constant pressure to perform flawlessly because anything less would reflect on every woman who followed. "Right. And I'm sure everyone was super supportive and not at all skeptical about whether you belonged there." She smiled despite herself. Some were supportive, others came around eventually. A few never did, and that's their problem, not mine. That's the right attitude. But Captain, when you're teaching those lieutenants, remember what it felt like when someone doubted you. Remember the corporal at the gate, the instructors who made you work twice as hard for half the recognition. Then teach your students better. His words resonated during her first day at Miramar. standing in front of 16 pilots who'd been selected for advanced training. Most were men, products of the same system that had produced her but without the additional friction she'd faced. They looked at her with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and in a few cases, thinly veiled doubt. She could read it in their posture, the way they assessed her ribbons and rank, calculating whether she'd earned her position or filled a diversity quota. She didn't bother with a long introduction. She pulled up footage from the SEAL extraction mission, the gun camera recording that showed the fishing vessel, the circling boats, the impossibly tight tolerances of the strafing runs. She let them watch in silence as the Super Hornet dove toward the surface, as the cannon fire walked across the first boat with surgical precision, as the jet wash flipped the final vessel. When the footage ended, she turned to face them. This is what perfect looks like when people are dying. This is what the job demands when there's no room for error, no second chances, no opportunity to request a do-over. You're here because someone thinks you can operate at this level. I'm here to prove whether they're right. Questions. A lieutenant in the second row raised his hand, young and confident in the way of people who hadn't yet learned their limits. Ma'am, that was incredible flying, but isn't using jet wash as a weapon outside normal tactical doctrine? Yes. So you violated doctrine to complete the mission. I improvised within my authority as on-scene commander when conventional weapons employment risked friendly casualties. Doctrine is a framework, Lieutenant, not a prison. The goal is mission success within acceptable risk parameters. The question isn't whether something's in the manual. The question is whether you have the judgment to know when the situation requires something the manual didn't anticipate and the skill to execute it successfully. Do you understand the distinction? He nodded slowly, and she could see respect replacing skepticism. The other pilots were watching her differently now, seeing past the initial assessment to the reality underneath. The course ran 12 weeks, intensive training in low-altitude tactics, precision weapons employment, and close air support. Nora pushed them relentlessly, grading not just their technical skills but their judgment, their ability to make split-second decisions under pressure. She failed 2 pilots who couldn't maintain the necessary standards, and they left angry, convinced she'd been unreasonably harsh. She lost no sleep over it. Better they learned their limits at Miramar than over a battlefield where Marines were counting on them. Lieutenant Chris Madden was her best student, a former F-16 pilot transitioning to Super Hornets who approached every scenario with methodical precision and absolute humility. After a particularly difficult training flight where he'd had to thread multiple danger-close gun runs through a simulated urban environment, he lingered after the debrief. Captain, can I ask you something personal? Depends on the question. How do you deal with the pressure? Not the flying. I know how to fly. But the pressure of knowing that if you're not perfect, if you make even a small mistake, it becomes a data point for everyone who doubted you should be here. I watched you during that SEAL extraction footage, and I realized you weren't just fighting to save those guys. You were fighting to prove that female pilots can execute at the highest level. That's weight most of us never have to carry. Nora considered her answer carefully. You're right that there's additional scrutiny. Every mistake gets magnified, every success gets qualified. But here's what I learned. The pressure makes you better or it breaks you, and you don't get to choose which until you're actually in it. I chose to let it make me better. I outworked everyone, outflew everyone until my performance was so undeniable that even the doubters had to shut up. And yes, it's exhausting. Yes, it's unfair. But the alternative is letting other people's limitations become mine, and I refuse to do that. Do you ever resent it, having to prove yourself constantly? Every day, she admitted. But resentment doesn't make me a better pilot. Excellence does. So I focus on what I can control, my preparation, my execution, my judgment. The rest is noise. Madden graduated top of the class, and during the ceremony, he made a point of thanking her publicly. Captain Khalid taught us that excellence isn't about being better than everyone else. It's about being undeniable. It's about flying so well that the doubters run out of excuses. She's the best instructor I've had in 12 years of military aviation, and if I can fly half as well as she does, I'll consider my career a success." The applause was genuine, enthusiastic, and Nora felt something shift inside her. Not validation from external sources she'd learned long ago that couldn't sustain her, but recognition that she'd completed a cycle. She'd been the doubted student. Now she was the instructor shaping pilots who would, hopefully, treat the next generation better than hers had been treated. Progress wasn't revolutionary. It was incremental, measured in individual pilots who learned to evaluate capability without letting preconception cloud their judgment. 3 months after the instructor course ended, Nora received orders for another combat deployment. SEAL Team 7 specifically requested her for close air support during a sensitive operation in the Arabian Peninsula. The request came with a personal note from Lieutenant Garrett. "We trust you to get it right when it matters most. SEAL Team 7 requests Viper 1." She deployed with a mixed sense of anticipation and wariness. Combat deployments meant long hours, constant stress, and the knowledge that every mission could be the one where her luck ran out. But they also meant purpose, the chance to use her skills for something that mattered beyond training scores and evaluation reports. The team she'd saved in the Strait remembered her, trusted her, and that trust was currency she'd earned through performance, not through rank or reputation. The deployment was intense. Weeks of missions flown in contested airspace where hostile air defenses made every sortie a calculated risk. She flew close air support for SEAL operations, provided reconnaissance for Marine patrols, and twice executed combat search and rescue missions for downed pilots. By the time she rotated home, she'd added another Distinguished Flying Cross to her ribbons and earned a reputation among Special Operations Forces as the pilot you wanted overhead when things went sideways. But the deployment also extracted its price. She came home exhausted, her sleep fractured by dreams of target coordinates and hostile fire, her relationship strained by months of absence and the inability to discuss what she'd actually done. Her sister tried to understand, asked careful questions, but the gulf between civilian life and combat operations was too wide to bridge with words. How could she explain what it felt like to hold someone's life in your hands, to know that your precision or lack thereof determined whether they saw their family again? The Navy offered her a promotion, a staff position at the Pentagon where she'd help shape future aviation doctrine. It was a career milestone, the kind of opportunity that signaled she'd been accepted into the upper echelons of military leadership. But it meant leaving the cockpit, trading the immediate satisfaction of missions executed well for the abstract influence of policy and planning. She took 2 weeks of leave to consider the offer, driving up the California coast with no particular destination, trying to hear her own thoughts over the noise of expectation and ambition. She stopped in a small town north of Santa Barbara, renting a cottage overlooking the ocean. The owner was a retired Marine gunnery sergeant who recognized her bearing if not her face. They talked over coffee, swapping stories with the easy camaraderie of people who'd served. "What brings you up here, Captain?" he asked eventually. "Trying to figure out what comes next. The Navy wants me behind a desk. My body wants to keep flying, and I'm not sure which voice to listen to." He nodded knowingly. The question isn't what sounds good, it's what you'll regret not doing. 20 years from now, when you're looking back, which choice leaves you wondering, what if? She knew the answer before he finished the question. She'd always known. The desk job was safe, respectable, a clear path to higher rank. But flying was who she was, not just what she did. The moment she'd first felt a Super Hornet lift off the deck, the moment she'd proven she could execute under impossible conditions, the moment she'd heard Lieutenant Garrett's gratitude and known she'd made a difference. Those moments defined her in ways that strategic planning never would. She declined the Pentagon position and accepted assignment as an operational squadron commander, leading a team of fighter pilots in ongoing operations. The decision surprised some of her mentors, who saw it as stepping off the career ladder. But Ramirez, who'd been promoted to Master Chief and was still maintaining her aircraft, just grinned when she told him. Good, the Navy needs you flying, not pushing papers. Besides, some lieutenant colonel in the Pentagon doesn't have nearly the same intimidation factor as the legend of Viper One. I'm not a legend. Captain, there are junior pilots who study your missions the way previous generations studied Maverick and Iceman. You're absolutely a legend. You just don't like admitting it because that feels like resting on reputation instead of current performance. But you can be both legendary and currently excellent. They're not mutually exclusive. He was right, as usual. Her reputation had grown beyond her ability to control it. Young pilots asked to fly her wing. Special operations units requested her by name. And increasingly, female aviators approached her at conferences and events, seeking advice about navigating a system that still carried the residue of decades when their presence was contested. She found herself becoming a mentor despite never intending to take that role. She gave advice that boiled down to the same principles that had sustained her: be undeniably excellent, control what you can control, and refuse to let others' limitations become yours. Some found the advice harsh, preferring solutions that didn't require outperforming everyone just to be considered equal. She understood the frustration but couldn't offer different wisdom without lying about her experience. During a conference panel on diversity in military aviation, a young officer asked the question Nora had been asked 100 times in different forms. How do you handle the pressure of representing all women in aviation? Don't you feel like every mistake you make reflects on everyone who looks like you? Nora considered the question, aware that dozens of people were waiting for her answer, that her response would be quoted and analyzed. I reject the premise. I don't represent all women any more than any male pilot represents all men. I represent myself, my training, and my performance. Yes, some people will generalize from my successes or failures, but that's their problem, not mine. My job is to be the best pilot I can be. Your job is to be the best pilot you can be. We're not ambassadors, we're operators, act accordingly. The answer was controversial, generating both praise and criticism. Some said she was shirking responsibility, that pioneers had an obligation to those who followed. Others said she was exactly right, that competence should be evaluated individually, not demographically. Nora read the responses with detached interest but refused to engage in the debate. She'd said what she believed, based on the experiences that had shaped her. The rest was other people's interpretation, and she couldn't control that any more than she'd been able to control the Marine corporal's initial assessment at the gate years ago. What she could control was how she led her squadron, how she mentored younger pilots, and how she executed missions when lives depended on her precision. That was enough. It had to be enough. Because the alternative, trying to be everything to everyone, trying to satisfy both the critics who thought she was too harsh and the admirers who wanted her to be a symbol rather than a person, that path led to paralysis and second-guessing. She was Viper One. She put rounds on target when it mattered. She made decisions based on tactical reality rather than political perception. And she slept well most nights, knowing that the people who counted on her, the SEALs and Marines and fellow pilots who trusted her with their lives, had never been disappointed by her performance. That, in the end, was the only metric that mattered.